Hi, everybody. Welcome to our live broadcast here with Dr. Margie Kirstein. Hello, Margie.
Hello, Sarah. Thank you so much for asking me to do this with you today.
I'm so happy that you could be here. It's been a long time since we were able to go live on social media. It was a habit that we picked up, one of the good habits that we picked up when the pandemic started. So we're excited to be back today. And I'll just introduce myself briefly and then we'll dive right in. Margie can introduce herself. As well. So I'm Sarah Otto, and I am the founder and director of Confianza. I have a live chat here. If anybody's watching live and wants to contribute, you can certainly do that. So just want to get that going. And we're really excited to work with you today, informally, around these kind of two really important topics of social emotional learning that we hear about and that we're focused on as we support teachers and students, but also this million-dollar word, equity. So, Margie, would you mind introducing yourself and talk to us a little bit about why these terms, why these concepts are important, and what does that even mean, honestly, in the field of
Sure.
education right now?
My name is Margie Kirstein, and I have worked with Sarah over the last several years. And during the pandemic, I had an opportunity to stay home and really dive deeply into my own social and emotional learning and to really focus on exploring many different coping skills. And I have dedicated almost my entire working career to working with English learners or multilingual learners. And I also have a lifelong interest in mindfulness. And when I started hearing about social emotional learning and coming back to school, I really wanted to apply what I had been learning about the whole area of mindfulness and social emotional learning to my work in education. So this project is a reflection of the research that I did in my own learning. And also understanding that social emotional learning for multilingual learners could look a particular way or has to look a particular way in order to be effective. So that is my focus.
And such an important focus. So we're going to learn from your research today, Margie, and I guess we'll go ahead and dive right in. This is available as a recording for those of you who can't join us live, as if you're part of our membership network, which I'll talk to you a little bit about later on. But yeah, Margie and I have worked together for years now, and I was going through these old pictures sort of in the before times when we didn't have to just meet online like this, Margie, when we actually met up in person, and I was so heartened by these are just some of the many instances where we got to work in schools together. So some good times, but we can still work together and we can still support each other, and most importantly, support students and educators. So these are some of the questions that you think about, right, Margie, when you're framing this work. How do we support students through this SEL and equity-based mindset?
Right. And some overarching assumptions that I'm making. One is that, SEL cannot be an add-on. It has to be integrated into everything that we do as educators. And we also know that our multilingual students have a need for social emotional learning to take a certain form or a certain approach. And so teachers cannot do this alone. We have to include students in decision making. We have to help students learn about themselves so that they can identify to us what they need. And we also have to deal with the realities of their lives and help them face the issues in their own lives that they need to face. So while on the one hand, this is an integration project for teachers, on the other hand, we really have the opportunity to bring students into the work and make them almost equal partners. I mean, depending on the age of the students that you teach, they really can be partners in developing social emotional learning in your classroom.
Yeah, and I know we work so hard at Confianza to support educators to support their students. It's not about doing things to students. So it's like your point is really knowing who students are, bringing them into the process of learning, but also the process of wellness. And here, I love this quote from Pedro Noguera talking about you can't separate out issues of inequities in the larger society and in schools like poverty, race, gender identity, and many, many other structural inequities. That was a concept that is really important to you, Margie, right? And it always has been, having worked with you for years. It's essential not to think of SEL as separate from racism per se.
Right. Well, we know that there are inequities that exist in the outside world, so to speak, in society, and we don't want to duplicate those in schools to the extent that we, even if it's in our own classrooms, can reduce some of those impacts. That's what we want to do. But we also have to know that these are ongoing issues. There won't necessarily be closure. Like, okay, we solved that problem of racism for you, so let's move on. And so, we want to make things better for students in school, and we also want to help them take a constructive approach, let's say, to these ongoing issues that they are going to face.
It's inevitable, unfortunately, because we are in a society and schools are such a microcosm of society. So we know that we can't separate out those inequities, but like you said, we don't want to recreate them. So
Right.
it's part of who students are. And sometimes we talk about that in terms of intersectionality, right? Students are language learners, but they're also 90% or more, depending on where you live, nationally, 90% of language learners are students of color. So we can't separate that out. Moving into other groups like poverty and ability or different ability. It's essential, as this quote says, and as I know you always help us remember that we've got to really bring the whole child in.
Right. I mean, I can just agree with that. I think, this quote says it very clearly. We have students coming into school who, are bringing with them life experiences and backgrounds. And if we don't inquire into that, we're really not completely educating them, really not completely developing them.
We're not. And I know one of the pieces of social emotional learning is from Cassell. Can you talk us through
Right.
that a little bit and explain what educators, both leaders and teachers alike, what we should know about these resources?
Right. Well, Cassell is the biggest organization in terms of education and social emotional learning, and they have developed these 5 competencies that they call the Cassell 5, and they're grouped into 3 areas: self-awareness and self-management, social awareness and relationship skills, and decision making. And many educators, particularly educators who work with the issue of equity, have found that applying these things without applying them mindfully to the students that we work with can result in it seeming as if we're saying there's something wrong with the students. They have to adjust themselves because they're not coping properly with whatever situations they're facing in life. And in fact, our students are impacted by situations that are not of their making. And so we really have to, our mindset has to shift from how do we fix the student to how do we reduce the impact of these situations on our students. So as Alex Chevron-Venet says, the kids are not broken, it's the system that's broken. So I said the shift, I'm not telling you as a student that you need to learn how to manage yourself. I'm telling you that I want you to develop yourself so you can be the healthiest that you can be. That to have an understanding of the student's need for this. And also, we're all humans, just as we don't want people discriminating against us and treating us unfairly. We also have to learn how, even in the face of extreme inequity, how to respond with equanimity. That's an important skill for all of us, but particularly for our students. And there's a wonderful book about that by Rhonda McGee about the need for us to heal ourselves in order for there to be social and racial healing. So those are the main mindset shifts. We're shifting from a focus on academic success. Because this is one of the Cassell 5, one of the focal areas is social emotional learning so that students can be academically successful. And many researchers, including myself, are saying, regardless of their academic performance, we want them to be well. We want them to have the tools they need. And that's a big shift for teachers, for all educators, anyone who works in the educational system. So this involves respecting where the students are coming from, seeing them as humans, teaching them to see others as humans. And we're not all just part of a system. And to build critical wellness, meaning we don't just acknowledge the problems, we take steps to address them. Of course, this philosophy comes from Paulo Freire, and he was saying it 50 years ago, but it's still good.
Yeah. It's nice to see a resurgence. I know that was a big researcher in my master's degree in social justice education. I mean,
right.
20 years ago. And it's classic because it's true, because we can't just talk about academics. And so I'm curious what you think of this educational landscape that hasn't changed in the last 20 so years in terms of measurement, because we don't really measure these things, do we? We measure the academics. And that's why I think in great part, there's that pressure for all educators to some extent to push, cover. We want students to be literate. We want students to have the core skills. However, that's being measured. These are not. So what happens, and where do you think we might go as a field with that? Do you see more shifts in not just mindset, but even measuring these things and putting them more?
I think in the last, I'm going to say 30 years, I don't know if that's the right amount of time, but there's definitely there has been a pro-college bias. Everybody's got to go to college. And, whereas in the 50s and maybe even in the 60s, there was vocational education. It was like the, lower class, second class citizen of the high school, but it was there. And then everyone's going to college, and that went hand in hand with the whole standardized testing, No Child Left Behind. I think that the federal legislation had a lot to do with that pro-college bias. And I think now slowly educators are starting to see kids need different pathways. And so many schools are going back to vocational education, but quality vocational education where the students are not seen as inferior. And again, this has to do with accepting our students for who they are, and what is going to get them into the best situation in their lives. To tell a student that everything is college focused, and if you don't get into college, where are you going to go? That's not really going to help them, particularly our students who come here from really dire situations and just really need some pathway to economic security,
Yeah, I do know, and I'm fortunate to work, especially these days, with a couple different schools, Margie, that are really focused on some the more traditional technical high school pathways, some a little less traditional. And I think it's really important that we think outside the box and we think about how to support students so that they're not being set up to fail, or even just to being set up to have, say, one option, like, oh, you have to have a 4-year degree. We know that that doesn't mean what it used to mean, and
No,
kids need options.
there are so many pathways for students. And my own personal bias when I started teaching was we didn't want students going in the military because, Vietnam and all of that. But, I saw when I worked at Somerville High School how some working class students went into the armed forces and came out just absolutely transformed. They were healthier, they were more physically fit, they had direction. So we can't say what is right for our students. We just have to embrace them as whole people and help them to get the tools to figure out where they need to go. And of course, as this quote shows, we can't do that if we don't have relationships with our students. I've been watching a lot of football lately, and I'm not a native speaker of football, but I'm learning. And one of the things that I love about sports, professional sports in particular, is the idea of teamwork. And, on a football team, everybody has a different job to do, and they all contribute to the outcome. And if you think of our students as a team, yeah, sure, there's the quarterback, but, there's also the guys that are just out there to push everybody around and open up, openings for other players to score. So we want to think of our classroom as a team where everybody has a role to play, and it's not one role is more important than the other or more, respected than the other. So how can we actually do this as educators? We definitely want to incorporate into every assignment an opportunity for students to learn about themselves as learners. How do I learn best? What do I need to learn? And acknowledge that if students have educational gaps, that again, it's not their fault. They may not have had access to education or only had access to inferior education. And as you always say, Sarah, stress students' strengths and funds of knowledge and make sure everyone has access, so we're just opening up to provide many different experiences for students, but also for students to explore, what do I want? What do I need? What works for me? How can I get this information and how can I use it?
I think it's showing more than ever, isn't it, with this ongoing pandemic, the inequities that were there, and they're becoming more intensified now. Margie, I couldn't agree more. I think people say, what is equity? I think for me, I always talk about, as you said, equity-based mindset and practices, which is getting to know your students and having them take a role. It's not that simple, but in a nutshell, that's, what I believe, because we're not successful with a one-size-fits-all model. So you're saying take that, help students know their own strengths, and don't be judgmental, but really allow this, more
right. And when
sounds like community.
Right. And when students know that they are learning something in a way that's helpful to them, they are going to be more engaged. And another part of this is to absolutely, ensuring access is not just what we call scaffolding for English learners, but it's absolutely making sure that students know what to do. So often students are turned off even when you start giving instructions. They've never done that before. They don't understand that way of thinking. Giving clear instructions, walking students through it step by step, modeling, showing examples is one of the most important things that we can do as teachers for every assignment. We can never take for granted that students know what to do. And that's a huge pathway to access.
Yeah. That's a wonderful way to put it. And I just want to remind folks that you wrote about this process in your earlier blog, looking at supporting students and supporting educators, that you go into more depth there, which is very helpful. Now, one of my favorite words you talk about in strategy too, which is equanimity. I just love that word. And I think I always think of an eye of a hurricane, like where it's calm, supposedly, and everything around us is challenging. How do we develop that sense of peace, or at least stability?
Right. So it's acceptance, right? Not that we're happy about it. Here's what we would call a negative situation. We're not happy about it, but if we can take a moment to acknowledge, yes, this is happening, and make a choice of how we want to respond, that's just allows us to calm down. We have the maybe initial stress reaction, but then we can calm down and think, okay, what action can I take here? And of course, one thing that we have seen in the last year or so is a huge source of stress for everybody now is other people, because everybody's like on edge, everybody's irritable, we've been socially isolated. So having an atmosphere in your classroom where you're teaching skills to respond to people who maybe disagree with you or rub you the wrong way is a hugely important skill, particularly for our students who are going to go out in the world and encounter negative feedback. I mean, it's sad to say, but it's going to happen, and we can't, tell students that they can stop that, but we can help them kind of at least learn to live in that world and understand that, again, it's not their fault. And, it's the hardest thing in the world to do. Jesus Christ said, turn the other cheek. But if you can be at peace in yourself, and again, not saying that you accept the behavior of the other person, but to not get dragged into some kind of conflict, I think that goes a lot further towards healing everyone than to just have students react and escalate conflicts.
When they go low, we go high, and teaching students to mitigate. These are the things that
our own
we can change.
Our own personal development is advanced so much when we do that, even though it's very hard. It's just so much to the benefit of the individual to do that, and then maybe healing another situation,
Which empowers, would you say, by having that equanimity, then you can build on that. And you can't necessarily change everything right away, but we can start to, as you wrote, empower students. How do you do that?
Well, practice, it takes practice, just like, when people talk about meditation, they talk about a practice. It's something, your awareness of your responses to things is going to go in and out, right? Sometimes you'll get upset. Everyone gets upset. We're humans. We have emotions. But to go out in the world and know that nobody can get to me. I mean, I think that's a superpower. Just to, not that you're going to have it, but that you're working on it,
Right.
And I think it's really important for our kids. So this is from James Butler, who's doing work in Austin, Texas, in the schools on mindfulness and equity. And he says, educational equity means that each child receives what they need to develop to their full academic and social potential, so that success and failure are no longer predictable by student identity.
Demographics are not destiny.
Right. And know that no social identity should be a predictor of whether or not students are successful in school. And, so it just requires changing our minds about what does success in school look like? What do we really need students to learn? Yeah. I remember years ago running into a former high school student on the street, and he came up to me and he said, "You were the only teacher that believed in me." Now, this kid was failing my class. He was probably failing others, but he was super smart, And he said, "Everybody else told me I was wasting my time, but because of you, I kept going." So that's what inspires me, is realizing that every kid is on a different path. And, we just have to support them on that path. And we have to want them to be successful. Of course, again, it's not up to us to determine that what is success. That is something that they can help determine themselves.
Ooh, I love that. I love that. And it reminds me too of how, and it's a recent blog I wrote about reminding people that it's not our job to define what somebody's identity is, especially when we talk about intersectionality, that it's up to that person. It's up to us to define our own identity, and how that's beautiful because it connects to what is success for you. It's not the same for everyone, which is a real mix up for our schools. We're not quite designed that way yet. I would say we have a lot of work
No,
to
and
do.
also demographically, we know that, what is it, 70-80% of teachers are middle-class white females. So, how do we know what to tell our student who, is an unaccompanied minor, walked from wherever, across the border, working nights? I mean, it would be presumptuous of us
Right.
to give advice, but we want to give those foundations, and we want to reinforce the strengths so that the student can keep going on their own path. I mean, we have to be inspired by our students.
I love that.
We have to be. So the Alex Chevron-Venet is a really important current expert in not only trauma-informed education, but equity-centered trauma-informed education. And a couple of the sources that I cited in the first blog, one is the book by Rhonda McGee about racial healing. She's a lawyer, and she teaches law and mindfulness courses. So as a lawyer, her prose is kind of dense, but it's the kind of book that you can really open anywhere and get an insight. So those two books I recommend. I haven't read the Tyrone Howard book. I have ordered it, but I don't know how long it's going to take to come from the publisher. Tyrone Howard talks about really making the focus on the whole student and not just on academics. So social emotional learning and equity means that for me, number one, we accept that who the students are, where they're coming from. We listen to them about their story, and then we help them find constructive ways of responding to that. So, here the teacher is not the sage on the stage, but the guide on the side, right?
Yes. Preach. Love that. We have to be inspired by our students. That's my takeaway. And I really appreciate that, Margie. I think whether you're joining us, people have popped in and out through the broadcast. If you're joining us later, we hope that this was useful and hopefully really affirming on, again, going back to these reflective questions of what we do when we're supporting bilingual, multilingual students, but even more so to continue to give them more, not give them, they already have power, but to acknowledge their power. And like Margie said, to be inspired by them. Beautiful. So again, the blog has some more ideas. Margie's got a lot more information there to share with you. So please check that out. And I did want to say that this is a member event. We have made this public, but if you'd like to access any of the archives of our many, many workshops and events that we've had, please join us. It's affordable, and all of our clients, whether you're working with us currently, you do get an invitation, but people who are not working with us, it's a way to be part of our community. We are having a discount right now for $10 off, and that'll be good through the whole month of December. So check it out. Just go to ellstudents.com/join. This is not a Cyber Monday offering. I'm not into that. I think I'm into deals for sure, but I'm not just saying it's for today. It's for the whole month, and it has nothing to do with Black Friday or Cyber Monday. It's just an invitation. We are also inviting you to sign up for our mailing list, which is at the bottom of our page, because we always want to hear from you, and we always want to share opportunities and resources like Margie's wonderful writing and other writing from our other contributors. We'll also be sending out a survey in the next couple weeks to hear from you, because we want to see if these are the kind of events that you're interested in or what we can do to support you. And so with that, I would just like to say again, thank you so much to Dr. Kirstein, and really appreciate you sharing your knowledge and research with us here.
Well, I would love to hear from any of the members now or in the future regarding what they're working on in the area of SEL and equity and how we can support them doing that. I mentioned to you that it would be fun to have maybe a work session where people bring some lesson plans or a unit and try to look at it from the standpoint of SEL and equity. How can we just work that into our teaching so that we're doing it all the time? And of course, it won't be perfect, but we can get started.
Absolutely. It's just about getting started. So very good. And just again, to end on this piece, it's not about blaming children or telling them that they're not fitting. It's the system needs to change. And that's an important piece of what we always try to help schools with. So again, thanks so much for being here, Margie, and wishing everybody a wonderful rest of your day, or whatever day you join us on in the future, rest of your week, and a wonderful moving into the last month of 2021. Thanks, everybody.
Wow.
Okay.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.